So, emotional intelligence, we're going to be talking about what does that look like for teams? And I've pulled this out of my highly effective team series because we know that there's been a lot of play around that. We know that people are really interested in it. And so one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through a really high level overview of what does it mean when we're talking about it in teams? What are the aspects or characteristics? But I also wanted to share with you a little bit around the look fors. So for example, what would we see or experience if it's not in place? And what would we see and experience if it when it is in place? Because I want you folks to kind of be on the lookout, looking for that qualitative data. Though I know a lot of you have experienced it already, I wanted to, give you a little bit more structure around that, and then also give you some strategies about some ways that you can cultivate emotional intelligence within your own programs. So, Danya, I'm going to ask you to drop in the PowerPoint slide into the chat so you folks can go ahead and download that. And Danya, if you have any troubles, let me know. I can also pull it in and drop it in as well. But that's what we're going to be doing. What I'd like to do is kind of talk to you about it a little bit. And then as we go through our time together, I'm going to stop and just ask you to reflect and maybe have some conversation around some of the things that you're experiencing as it's relating to emotional intelligence. So here we go. Awesome. Danya, drop that PowerPoint into the chat. So thank you, thank you, thank you. So when we're talking about being emotionally intelligent, and again, we're talking about it from our teams, those people who we supervise, who we meet with, and whether it's a classroom team or whether it's our itinerants working as a team, we want to be thinking about the aspects they're bringing into our programs. And so we're really talking about the team's ability to manage emotions with all of the craziness that we know happens in our programs, either with, things that might be happening with our children or our families or even among colleagues. So how do we work together as a really cohesive unit when it matters the most? And so we're going to be talking really, again, high level about four aspects. One is emotional awareness. Another is emotional management. The third one is internal relationships. And then the last one is external relationships. So we're going to do, again, a real high level overview of each one of those, some of the look fors, and then some ways that we can cultivate it. And then I want to make sure to leave us some time so that we can talk through some of the strategies or the exercises or the things that you do in your program that promote any one of the four aspects. So the one things I wanted to start with is emotional awareness. And as you can see to the left-hand side, it basically means how are teams coming together and accurately, you'll notice that's it's bolded because we can make things up all the time. So are we reading our colleagues, our team members' emotions accurately? Are we understanding them? And do we have an idea of their patterns? Meaning, how do they react or respond in certain situations so that we can support them and support each other? So that's what it means about emotional awareness at the team level. So a couple of things to think about. The left-hand side is when it's in place, we're going to see really calm, responsive teachers. And basically what we're meaning by that is we're going to be looking at educators who are really patient, composed, they pause before reacting. We're going to be seeing those strong teacher-child relationships, and we're going to be looking for attunement, meaning are the teachers aware of and responding to the different emotional needs of the children? And are they validating those feelings? We're going to be seeing reduced behavioral outbursts. So we know that the children are going to be better at managing their frustrations, their disappointments, their anger, because they're going to be learning it from the teachers in their program. That means you're going to be less yelling or tension or emotional escalation. And the last thing is we're going to be looking at positive peer interactions, right? So how are those children interacting with each other? Are we seeing those really strong positive social skills like empathy? Are they showing each other kindness, cooperation, and respect? So those are the things that we want to be looking for. So when you're walking around and you're popping into your classrooms or the different settings, what are you noticing? And on the other hand, I also wanted you to be aware of when it's not in place, what are some things we might be seeing as well? So we might be seeing strained relationships, right? Maybe difficulty understanding students' emotions or increased student frustration or reduced trust or connection between our staff and children. We're going to see a lot happening in terms of classroom management. So maybe reacting emotionally instead of responding thoughtfully to challenges, or struggling to de-escalate those behaviors or those conflicts, or misunderstanding behavioral cues, or maybe our discipline might be inconsistent, and there might be unpredictability in the environment. And then, of course, all of this is going to lead to definitely some increased burnout and stress. Right. And so there might be some increase in experiencing emotional exhaustion at the end of the day. So again, if you're starting to see some of these things, we want to be thinking about, okay, what can we put into place? And then that last one is limited collaboration with our colleagues. So maybe difficulty handling feedback constructively. It can be poor communication or misunderstandings. And again, it could be struggles in resolving conflicts or working as a team. So I I want to stop here because I actually want to ask you folks, what are some of the things that you're seeing or experience, whether it's because emotional awareness is in place or it's not in place? So who's willing to either pop into chat or come off of mute and just share some of the things that they're seeing or experiencing. Ah, thank you. So Nina wrote in, so some absenteeism. Yes, and we know there could be a lot of different reasons. So as we're checking in, if again, if it's that emotional exhaustion, or things are going on, there's difficulties going on, and people are, tapping out, absolutely, we want to be checking in around that. Anyone else? And again, you can write into chat or come off of mute. Poor communications with families, with parents. Absolutely. So again, is where we're thinking about what are some of those things that we can put into place. That's where I'm going to go next. So I wanted to give you some ideas of what are some ways that you can cultivate, right, or promote emotional awareness across your teams. And so if you look at the first one, like fostering that supportive and emotionally safe environment, we can do things like really encourage our teachers to express their emotions in a really safe and non-judgmental space. One of the things we can do also, especially in our capacity as leaders, is normalize those discussions about stress, emotional challenges, and self-care. Like just have those conversations on an ongoing basis. Or during staff meetings, do those emotional check-ins just like we have them in our classrooms in terms of how are we feeling today. Encourage reflective practice, right? So again, thinking about providing training and professional development. Well, there's lots of things that we could do there. So, for example, this session here. It's being recorded, so you can go back and replay it and use it with your staff to get them thinking about each one of the aspects. I know many of us have delved into wellness strategies and are promoting that, so we get to keep doing that as well. But don't forget about some professional development around conflict resolution and using communications, because it's not an if misunderstandings are going to occur. It's going to be a when. So how can we support that? Model emotional awareness and regulation, right? So again, just like we want our teachers to be modeling for children and families, or our home visitors when they go back into the family's home or in those different settings, we want to be modeling it for it as well. And so what does that look like for us in terms of being approachable, empathetic, and most importantly, modeling self-care. Because oftentimes, a lot of times, what we do is we say to staff, hey, we want you to keep your work life in balance, or we want you to be thinking about self-care. And then we're staying at our programs till all hours of the night, or we're sending off emails over the weekend. So you have to remember, if we're not doing it for ourselves, it's going to make it really, really difficult for staff to do it as well. We talked about emotional check-ins and support systems. So again, think about doing it regularly, like during those staff meetings and certainly during our one-on-ones. And one of my new favorite things that a lot of programs have started to do is, how we have calm down corners for, children within classrooms? A lot of programs are actually starting to um, take some spaces like a closet and clear it and turn it into a calm down space or room that can accommodate one, maybe two people for staff, a place where they can go in and maybe there's soft music playing or the lights are down low or there's a soft chair. It's just a place to go in and for us to re-regulate, for us to calm ourselves down as well. And then, of course, we want to encourage those emotional relationships with families. So there's a lot of ways that we can cultivate emotional awareness. And one quick example that I love doing is speed dating. And how speed dating works is you literally go around the room and you just talk about how you're feeling in that moment. And so for me right now, I'm like, oh, you know what? This is Friday. It's actually at the end of my workday today because I'm here in Texas. I've got some great plans this weekend, as I mentioned earlier. So I'm excited. I'm excited to share this information with you, and I'm excited because I'm also looking forward to the weekend as well. So doing this on a regular basis and then having other people say whatever their emotion is helps staff again get used to and normalizing discussions about how they're feeling. And it takes them out of the realm of quote unquote, I'm fine. So again, getting people to think about that. The next aspect is emotional management. So this is how we behave in response to our emotions. So what happens when we're thrown off by, maybe something a family member has said, or there's a deadline coming up and we have a lot on our plate, or there's a new initiative coming down the pike and there's a lot of uncertainty. This is a great one, especially now because we're having a lot of these conversations around our political world where there's a lot of uncertainty happening. How are we responding to that? And how are we doing it in a way that's constructive? And so when we're talking about what does that look like when it's in place? We're talking about being composed. And it's not that we don't, we don't have those moments where we're frazzled or, or upset or frustrated. We're really talking about our recovery rate. So what do we do to quickly regain our calmness and self-regulate? And then how are we modeling that again for our staff, for our children, and for our families during those really stressful moments? When we're thinking about resiliency and flexibility, we know that when things don't get planned and that happens all the time, how do we bounce back and adjust maybe our expectations or some of the work in order to move through this, or handling setbacks with that problem-solving mindset, like being solution focused rather than failure or I can't do it, that fixed mindset. And then, of course, there's self-awareness and reflections. So here is when we see teams helping each other to take that step back. Oh my gosh, you look a little frazzled right now. We- Um, I've got this. Why don't you go and, take a 30-second breather and just go and literally, take a few deep breaths. So again, supporting each other. When it is not in place, one of the things we are definitely going to see is things like burnout and stress. We are going to see that high or the higher absenteeism, like Nita, you had mentioned earlier. We're going to see things like a more reactive, more reaction when it comes to those behaviors, because we know children are going to fall out. They're young children. But what happens when they do we overreact, or do we get so stressed out about it instead of, again, gathering that patience? We might see more increased disruptions within the classroom because the children um, have more emotional outbursts. So thinking about that and helping staff to realize and understand that when they are dysregulated, when they're not calm or they're angry, frustrated, resentful, or whatever the dot dot is for them, that it transfers to our children. So dysregulated adults actually create dysregulated children. So helping our staff really understand that is important, because a lot of times they don't realize that even if our children are calm, if we are not, then we can upset that apple cart, so to speak. So, some ways that we can cultivate that emotional management is again fostering that emotionally supportive workplace. So, some examples of what that might look like include, again, doing those regular check-ins that I mentioned earlier, or creating those peer support groups, right? Those smaller cohorts. Now, this is different than cliques, right? Cliques form on their own through friendships that, colleagues create with each other. And there is positivity in that, and sometimes there's some negative aspects to that. But really starting to think about, who can I put together, or who can I pair up that could really support each other? Again, we're talking about providing that training and resources and offering that ongoing professional development. Things like doing role-playing exercise where teachers can practice de-escalation strategies. There's a lot of great resources out there. I know the pyramid model has great resources around strategies for de-escalation. So you can use those and do some mini um, exercises around that. It doesn't have to be a whole PD day, but it could just be a 5 or 10 minute exercise we're embedding into our existing meetings. Again, we talked about encouraging that healthy work-life balance. It only really works if we're doing it as well. So really wanted to put that out there, and think about those ideas around breaks. We know that we need to give them to staff. The question is, are staff really taking them, or are they going off and doing, catching up on work or catching up on email? So really encouraging staff to use those breaks to reset and catch their breath and go back in and join and rejoin their classroom. Things like building that emotional resilience, right, through support systems. So again, thinking about intentionally building the peer support or thinking about developing mentorships where people can connect with each other. I know most of us, it's not all of us, are doing reflective supervision. So that's a great way to use our existing supports around building in that emotional resilience. And then, of course, equipping our educators to manage students' emotions positively, right? So again, thinking about supporting our staff in teaching them how to teach children how to manage their and regulate their emotions. Um, Putting in those strategies for handling tantrums calmly, right? Or diffusing our children's frustration. Thinking about the idea of connection over control, right? So instead of managing children's behavior or shutting them down, really helping our staff to understand the significance of the bottom of the pyramid, where those really warm, trusting, positive touch points are helping our children manage their emotions. So lots and lots and lots of stuff that we can do. So I'm going to stop here for a minute because I want to throw out a question, and either you can take yourself off of mute or you can jump into chat. But what are some ways that you are already putting into place, um, strategies or exercise that's supporting our staff's emotional management, right? There's awareness and then managing them or responding to our emotions. And so I love throwing that question out there, and I'll throw it out there again because I want you to really be thinking about this. What are some ways that you're already putting some of these strategies into place?
Hi, this
Engage
is
strategies. Oh, Margolis, is that you?
yes, yes. My name is Juan Ledesma from the Hope Street Family Center.
Oh, wow. Okay, Margolis is the conference room. So you're Juan.
Yes,
Thank you,
yes.
Juan.
So I like all of these ideas that you're sharing, but one of the things that comes to mind is also face-to-face communication.
Hmm.
I mean, we have email and we also text, but whenever possible, um, the communication of choice is face-to-face communication and daily if possible.
Hmm. So one, I mean, I love and really appreciate that idea, and because it's gotten really easy to just send somebody a text or to email them, even if they're sitting in the office across from us, right? Or they're the classroom just down the hall. And so when you take the time to stand up and go and actually meet with people face to face, it sends a big message. It sends that message of caring that I want to connect with you personally, which we know is super, super hard. It's not that it can't be done, but it's much harder when it's email or text or that phone call. And I know that a lot of supervisors put in those touch points right at the beginning of the day. I know when I was a director, that's what I used to do. I would call it my kid fix, and I would go in the morning before I even looked at my email, and I would do check-ins and stop in and say hello to every single one of my classrooms as I went from my different sites. Natasha, no worries. Check out the recording, and we'll see you in a bit. Nina, I know you also said engagement strategies. Are you able to come off of mute and just give us some
Sure.
ideas of what that looks like?
We are developing a lot of new practices in response to the change in the regulations, more focused on engagement and culture of wellness. We
Mm-hmm,
were already doing wellness things, um,
mm-hmm,
but now I think this gives us an opportunity to better define these activities and pulling it back into engagement is really putting the expectations on on supervisors to be able to support, to have true supervision, reflective supervision, to
Mm-hmm.
start to model behaviors that are, um, more open, more receptive, to bring opportunities for true feedback loops of not just opportunities of, okay, like, let me hear, or a
Mm-hmm.
comment box,
Mm-hmm.
but an opportunity to actually have two-way dialogue around concerns, issues, and actually plan resolution together so that there's opportunity for people to give their ideas of what would be the best way to solve issues or problems, um, so that there's more buy-in, more cohesion, more collaboration amongst teams and among departments. Um, so we're doing a lot of new things around that. So yeah, there's a
Yay.
lot.
So, and I know we don't have time to unpack all of this, but I want to throw this out there, not only for you, but other people who might be listening later on, or even with us in the room today. But I'm wondering what um, what changes do you need to make in your not necessarily your policies, although maybe so, but your procedures, right? In order to create the time and the space for that to even happen. Because we all have great intentions. I mean, like I said, we're all doing reflective supervision, but is it truly reflective supervision if we're always being interrupted while we're in a one-on-one,
Mhm.
with staff, right? So thinking about being intentional, like how are we really going to do all of this? So I really appreciate the fact that you're saying you're stepping back and really looking at putting this in place. And the other thing that came to me while you were talking is the word empowerment. When you're talking about those two-way dialogue, so that being inclusive of other people's ideas, not just people in certain positions or roles, right? So how are we including our paras? How are we including our teaching assistants? We have all of these, I wouldn't say all of these, but we have a big um, portion in terms of, like our family, because it's Friday and I forgot the word for it, but strategies that we have for our family engagement, right? Even our family board. And I know there's a name for it and I just can't remember it. But we have these things put into place to include our family's voices. What would it look like to have something like that for our staff's voices? And again, what would we need to do, change or shift in order to create space for that to occur? So again, when we're talking about emotional awareness and now management, we're not talking about those things that are just really nice to have. And so we're really talking about how do we embed it in the fabric of our programs, so that it doesn't rest on Nina to make sure that it's happening, right? Or Juan, if Juan's not there and not able to do his one-on-ones, today, how does that naturally happen, regardless? So again, thinking about even sustainability with some of these things so that they almost become a legacy that we leave behind that will just carry on. Right? That's one of the biggest gifts that we have. Oh, Nina, thank you. Policy Council. I knew there was a name out there, but I just couldn't remember. And you're actively assessing lines of supervision and position descriptions. Yes. And I'm sure that your staff are excited, maybe to a certain degree, about what that looks like, because I think that's tends to be one of our biggest complaints. I don't have the time to really connect with our staff. And so, super, super excited. And again, I know we don't have time here to unpack it, but I'm going to encourage you folks in your other platforms to talk about those things that you are doing that's creating the space. So, Nina, I'm going to volunteer you folks. If you're wondering what Nina's doing, reach out to her, ask her what she's doing, share with her some of your ideas that you've done so that you can support each other, right? There's a great saying that says success leaves clues. So we get to learn from each other's successes and as well as from our mistakes, right? Because they can also be great learning lessons too. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, I'm going to keep us going. And here is, again, just another exercise that I really appreciate doing because, especially during like a meeting or at the beginning of a training, it says this morning, but literally you can switch it out for whatever time of day. And so I'm having people check in and ask them, how full is your battery? What are you currently feeling? I like this graphic because it's not only, visually appealing, but it helps show the different levels. So it gives some people something to look at and kind of compare to. And one of the reasons that I like this is, again, it takes us away from the I'm fine, right? Because we always ask everyone, how are you doing? I'm fine. So this is much, much more specific and we can get much greater detail. We get people comfortable and again, normalizing the conversations around how we're feeling. And then here is a caveat that I throw in after a few times of doing it, just leaving it, with them answering the question. The next step, what I'll do is I'll scaffold and I'll add the next question of, and what support can you use from your team members? Now, this is huge because remember, we're talking about emotional management and we're looking at it from a team perspective. So, getting people used to talking about the support they could use or asking for support. Because along with I'm fine means comes I've got it, I'm good, no, thank you. And we want to get people into the habit of saying, actually, I'm struggling a little bit today. Gosh, what support can I use? Maybe, you can step in and do this lesson today, and then I can come back later on and do this, so switching some of the responsibilities for the day, or there's so many different things that we can think about. So again, these little exercises, I shouldn't call them little because they actually have great impact, but by little, I mean that one, they're free. Two, they don't need to take a lot of time. And they're easy to embed in what we're already doing. So again, getting you out there and thinking about putting these things into the fabric, the flow of the day. Okay, so I'm going to keep us going. So we're halfway through. If you're just joining us, welcome, welcome. We're talking about emotional intelligence. Really appreciate you being here. And we're talking about internal relationships. And again, we're talking about from the team aspect. So this is how do our teams interact with each other? And this is what I call the core team. And by core team, I put an example up there, like a classroom team would be a core team. I define it as those people who you work with day in and day out. That would be your core team. And so, how do they work together? And you'll notice it says on the good days, and especially, I feel like I should highlight, bullet that, or underline it, especially during the bad days, because it's easy when things are going well. But how do we do when things aren't going well? How do we connect with each other? How do we support each other? So when we're looking at What does it look like when it's in place or not in place? On the left-hand side, we're going to see things like that mutual respect. Right. So valuing each other's expertise and experiences. I call this honoring the wisdom in the room, regardless of somebody's role. So this is something I say, I don't care if you're the lead teacher. I don't care if you're the assistant teacher or you're a pair or volunteer. Everybody has wisdom. Everybody has experience. So how can we honor that? Encouraging and supporting. So, do we actively hear people saying, "Oh my gosh, you've got this," or "Way to go"? That lesson or how you read that story was phenomenal. Did you see how the children responded to that? Or when our colleagues are struggling, or maybe they're feeling overwhelmed, how are we stepping in to help or offering resources or just listening? Because listening is a huge gift in and of itself. Are we doing things like regular check-ins and meetings? We'll see that happening. And those are those touch points with each other, with again asking, hey, are you doing okay? What's going on? um, Checking in not only about our well-being, but workload, our classroom or again, or even the home setting, or if we're having parent-child activity, play dates, those type of things, and talking about those successes, but also what are some things that maybe didn't go so well? How can we support each other around that? And then I love this last bullet. I've been doing lots and lots and lots of talking about celebrating success together because as a field, we actually don't do enough of it. And there's tons and tons and tons of research coming out about the benefits and the impact around celebration, which is different than acknowledgement. Right. So if you have a to-do list and you're like me, you like crossing it off or checking it off, that's acknowledging it. But when we actually stop to celebrate and we celebrate the small and we don't wait for the big ones, again, it's like, oh my gosh, that transition was awesome. The children actually went from whole group out into centers with no challenges. This is the first time this week. Yes. It doesn't take a long time, but what you'll notice the difference between acknowledgement and a celebration is bringing the emotion into it. So when we do this, we're actually sending off those dopamine hits, which is like candy to our brain, and it encourages us to do it even more so. So thinking about in embedding those celebrations in throughout the day. And the other thing it's part of celebrating success together is thinking about individuals and looking and feeling about their victories as part of the whole team, right? So when one person is successful, the whole team is successful, and help building that sense of community and that shared accomplishment. Now, on the other hand, here are some things that you might not see when um, there aren't positive internal relations happening. So, for example, decreased collaboration and teamwork. If people are in their separate corners. Now, they may be getting their job done, but the types of interactions are not necessarily positive or they're stilted. You'll notice that second one, negative classroom environment. A lot of times when we're going in and we're doing things like our class observations, we know there's a whole dimension around that, and where are we with that, and to what degree are we seeing that? Knowing that when staff are not interacting or getting along well with each other, our children and our families notice that. Remember that our children regulate off of our nervous systems. And so even though there may not be active, fighting or arguing, when our body is angry and frustrated, we are still putting it out there, our children can feel it, their nervous system feels it. It creates tension, and that can also lead to a lot of children behaviors or misbehaviors. Poor communication with colleagues and students, parents and families, and we talked about that a little bit. We tend to get a little bit more miscommunication, or we actually get interactions that might be just passive aggressive. Or there's tension, the inability to really constructively move through those conflicts. And again, knowing that conflicts are going to happen. We're human. It's a part of our work lives, a part of our personal lives. So how do we move through that? And if our internal relationships aren't going well, it increases the likelihood of those problems staying in place or going underground, and that's when you get things like triangulation that happens, otherwise known as that drama triangle, or it can also get a lot of things like backbiting, right? Or gossiping. So those things happen. And then the last one is reduce professional growth. We don't tend to think about this, but when our relationships with our colleagues aren't going well, a lot of times we may resist getting feedback from them, right? If I feel like, someone doesn't like me or we're not getting along and they state an observation, I'm not so likely, to hear it or respond to it or take action on it. So thinking about that. But not only that, but we tend to be a little bit more hesitant around seeking mentorship or just reaching out for those learning opportunities. And we also can get stuck in having a real fixed mindset as opposed to that growth mindset. So all of these things impact the way we relate to each other and also with our children and our families. So here are some ideas in terms of cultivating those internal relationships, within our teams. So, of course, we talk about that culture of open communication, and we've been throwing around that term of psychological safety a lot, meaning how much or how well do people feel that they can openly share um, things that may be bothering them or asking those questions that may, seem like, I don't want people to think I'm stupid or I don't know what I'm doing. So when we talk about open communication, we're talking about how can we put those things into place where, again, people feel comfortable coming in and sharing. We also want to be thinking about excuse me, strengthening teamwork and collaboration. So involving our staff in some of those decision-making processes. Now we know there are things that are, that come down that are non-negotiable. We have to do them. They're compliance-based. And yet there's other things that we can give a lot of negotiations around. So for example, there may be a new curriculum that we're rolling out. That's non-negotiable. Everybody needs to use the curriculum. But what we can negotiate is how they use it. How does it get embedded into lesson plans or implemented over the course of the week? So thinking through some of those things as well. And don't forget about, cross classroom or cross setting observations so that we can learn and grow from each other. And I know we're already really, really good at hosting like those team building activities. So we get to keep that doing going or turn that over to staff and let them plan some of those things. We also want to be thinking about recognizing and supporting and appreciating our staff's efforts, right? So again, this idea of celebration comes up. Get to celebrate the small things as well as the big things. So I know there are some programs that have celebration boards in their staff break rooms. And as staff, maybe, maybe there's a new baby in the family, or maybe somebody, graduated, got their degree or their CDA. Those are all big things. But maybe there's a birthday that somebody has that we can put up there. Or maybe somebody got a new car or a car that's new to them. Anything can be put up there so that we can share with each other the great things that are happening as well. We want to be thinking about promoting, again, that supportive and inclusive environment. So we know we've been working a lot on that when we've talked about implicit bias or embedded cultural humility, raising up those conversations so that we can get to know people at a very deeper level, like going deeper into the iceberg, as we like to say. Or sometimes thinking about having some of those conversations where there's been conflict, because we know that conflict, almost what, like high 80% of conflict is due to cultural biases that a lot of times we may not even know that we have. Thinking about our onboarding, right? So bringing new staff in or new to us staff in, and what does that process look like? And how can we connect those new teachers to other teachers and again, promote that teamwork? Thinking about those growth and development opportunities, right? Forming those PLCs. We do this all those times as professional learning communities, but here's a novel thought. What if we change some of the content that we're looking at? Because many of the PLCs orient around, maybe specific strategies, right? Or again, curriculum or content that we're bringing in. But what about different books? So, for example, one PLC that I did with staff was I bought each classroom the book around what is it? Crucial conversations, and we went through and chapter by chapter reread it and developed reflective questions and talked about that and did some case scenarios around where can we use these strategies, or as people were coming up with situations, going back into the book and saying, okay, what strategies might work for us? So things like that. And then, of course, there's addressing and preventing workplace conflict. It's not that it's not going to happen, but how can we reduce the likelihood? And when it does happen, what is our procedures for going through it? Because just like anything else, we get to develop a procedure or a protocol for helping people manage and go through the conflict. So what does that look like? And how can we put things in place around that? And I know up in team agreements, we spent a lot of time talking about that, and it's in fact how team agreements got started as a conflict resolution strategy. So one of the things, again, that I wanted to share with you is some structured protocol around having communication. So one of the things that I had created and shared with staff was, again, this idea of team agreements. And here's an example of one that talks about how we're going to communicate each other, especially when conflict comes up. And so there are some expectations that we put into place based on our program's norms and values. But at the same time, there are some questions that I wanted the teams, the individual teams, to go through and think about for themselves. So they're the ones that are creating their agreements, and then they get to write them down. So if they forget or they need to go back and refer to them or tweak them and change them, they have something written to go back to. And so again, I'm going to stop here for a minute and just ask people to either jump in on the chat or take yourself off of mute and jump in and ask you what are some ways that you support those internal relationships. So within those core teams, what are some things that you're doing that's you find really helpful? So Nina, thank you for writing in. And she wrote that this is where we struggle. And so, again, in terms of things like professional development, there's lots of really good resources out there. And there's a term that I go out and I use. So when I go out and do training on teams, again, this is one of the series that's underneath that training. I go in and talk about there's a difference between team building and team working. And we're really good at doing team building. Those exercises and those get-togethers to bring the team together to have those positive touch points. And the question is, how do we keep that going? What is that momentum? And so lots and lots of ideas. And again, you could always go to the website. There's lots of resources that I have up on there. It's all about working with teams. It's teamagreements.com and resources. They're free, so don't worry about that. You can download and try some of those out, or reach out and connect, and we can talk about ways to come in and really support you in different trainings that we can do. So thank you for that. Okay, I know we only have a couple more minutes left, about 30 more minutes or so I'm going to keep us going because I also want us to spend time talking about our external relationships. And so this is where we're thinking about how do teams interact and work with other teams. So a real easy example of this is, within your site, if you have multiple classroom teams, how do they get along with each other? Do they get along with each other? What does that look like, or is there friction? But it's not only team to team within our organizations, but external relationships also look at our relationships outside of our programs. It could be out with the community. We already talked a little bit about our families. That would be an external relationship. Or it could be with other roles within the organization, like our HR department or our IT department, or those people that are or our itinerants alliteration there. Like our specialists, right? Our speech paths or our OTs. I mean, how are we working with them? And so when we're talking about really positive external relationships. On the left-hand side, this is where we're going to see those things that are going to be in place. And one of them is really strong community engagement, meaning our staff not only have strong relationships within our program, but they're out in their community. They know, those stores that are out there. They know those resources, those other agencies and who work with them. We've built those really strong partnerships with each other so that we're working with each other and wrapping around our families, knowing that our families are navigating their way around all of their programs, and we share a lot of these same families. Or we're taking part in local events that are going on. We're going to see those positive relationships with school administration and peers. So this is a really good one because when we have strong external relationships, we see a lot less of the me versus them, right? You don't hear language like they. They're saying we have to do this. Instead, we're hearing language like we. We are doing this. We are rolling this out. And so there's a big difference. There's not that split in between. Transparency and accountability are going to be in place, meaning not only are we sharing, with our families what we're doing, but also with the community members. How are we including them in a feedback loop saying, hey, this is what we're doing and what are you doing? So that that dialogue gets to be external as well as internal. And what processes are we putting in place that's going to ensure that's more likely to happen? But here's the other piece as well, is that we're actually talking about the big A. And I call it the big A because it's accountability. And this, when we start talking about accountability, a lot of times our teams and even ourselves, it can cause a little, what I call a little squeegee feeling, like, oh, holding somebody accountable or holding ourselves accountable. There tends to be a negative connotation like that. Like somebody did something wrong and so they need to be told or corrected or fix it. But when we're really talking about those positive relationships, we're talking about holding ourselves accountable. And Rosia, thank you. I appreciate you being with us. And so we're talking about holding ourselves accountable for our own actions, meaning when we make those mistakes, because it's not going to be an if, it's a when, how do we own up to them? How do we take responsibility for them and move things forward so that we can problem solve so that they're less likely to happen again? Knowing that when we're putting in when these things are in place, we're going to have that increased trust. And also, you're going to see that promotion of school activities. Our staff are going to be out there talking about, hey, we're having this at our school, or we're doing this next week. Do you want to come? Check this out. Oh my gosh, this is great if you could be there. So there's enthusiasm, and as opposed to, on the other side, when it's not in place, that dread, oh my gosh, we have another school event. I really don't want to come, right? So thinking about that as well. Also, when it's not in place, we're going to see the weak engagement and trust with our children, and meaning that they're going to not want to to be a part of what we're doing, especially if we're in struggle with our families, because we know that our families can really support us there. We're going to have a lot more issues because we're going to see that lack of trust is going to sometimes result in children not being respectful or not wanting to trust somebody and less likely to, engage in those lessons or those activities. A lot of times we're going to see limited parental support and communication, right? So parents may feel like they're not informed or they're not included, or that message is just going one way. Like they're getting the newsletters home, they're getting these handouts, but what if it doesn't really apply to them? So are we really scaffolding what we're sending home to families so this family, is getting this because they may need that resource as opposed to everybody getting everything at the same time? Or are families, connecting? Maybe we're having those conferences, and asking families, for their opinions or their thoughts, but yet we're not following through with them. So families start becoming disengaged because why bother? We're going to also see increased professional isolation. So this is something that we don't think about, but when we don't have those strong external relationships into place, a lot of times staff start feeling unsupported and then they start to disconnect, right? So there's a term out there. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but it's something like leaving um, without leaving. So meaning staff are still there. They may be showing up every day, but they're not present. So thinking about that as well. Also, again, we're going to see those struggles with conflict. right? Difficulty handling the disagreements professionally because they're going to happen. But how do we move through that in a constructive manner? When disconnection starts happening, we're going to see increased miscommunication and frustration. And then a lot of times we're going to see the resulting school culture, a negative school culture, right? And a lot of things start snowballing. Again, absenteeism, gossip, triangulation, the meeting after the meeting, all of these start to occur when these things are not in place. Oh, Nina, I love you. Quiet quitting. Yes, you hit it right on the head. And so we want to be aware of that because these are all flags, right? This is all feedback. Oh, there may be some gaps in what we're doing that we actually need to go in and be thinking about. So, what are some things that we can do? Again, we want to be looking at strengthening that family and teacher partnership, right? So, talking about looking at um, having those really true dialogues. So showing our families that the information that they're giving us, we're actually using, right? And putting it out there so that they can see that we're using it, setting those really, clear expectations. So now we're talking about boundaries because sometimes we're not really good at that, especially as educators, and we want to be, available to families. We saw this happen a lot with COVID when everybody was online. And some people are still, maybe accepting those calls from families late at night, and we need to be thinking about that so that we don't increase burnout. We want to be thinking about, again, building those really strong community partnerships. We've gotten really good at bringing people in, like our uh, I don't know, our poster workers or our librarians or our firemen or firewomen, people from the community so that our children can see it and get used to them and connect to what that looks like. Also bringing in our families, getting those surveys on who's really good or who has a passion and how they can use that to help support us and stay connected, whether they're actually doing it within our schools or doing it without. We know that a lot of our families have 2 to 3 jobs or lots of pressure on them, outside of our school setting. And so, what are some ways that we can connect with them, knowing that they time is a very valuable resource for them? We want to be thinking about promoting positive relationships with other schools. There are so many other schools around them, and not just Head Start or early Head Start, programs. What about our community-based programs or some of those private preschools? What are some ways that we connect? So a lot of times we have really good professional development opportunities. Is there a way that we can extend those opportunities to those other schools, so that they can also benefit? It's a great way of leveraging, that money and getting a bigger bang for a buck, or partnering with other schools to do community events, or with other agencies to do events as well. And then, of course, supporting our educators to engage in local and government resources. So when we're thinking about that, again, some strategies are looking at some ways that we can provide information. So I know some programs that have given their teachers all um, um, gosh, I'm having a Friday moment here. Um, Give them like pay their dues for like NAEYC or other subscriptions like that so that they can stay connected, or they help their staff go out and look for and write references for maybe grants that maybe a staff member wants to do something a little different, or they want to try something innovative, and there is funds out there for them to do that. So different ways of connecting our staff to the community. And then again, providing training and guidance, right, around those external relationship building. So again, thinking about effective communication skills. How do we help those people feel comfortable and having different conversations with different levels? So for example, when again, is sometimes we operate within a school district. So is there a superintendent? How do we just imagine a teacher or even an assistant teacher having a conversation with somebody at that level, or in thinking about different ways of bridging that gap so people feel more comfortable. Um, and then also thinking about ways that we can acknowledge and celebrate our staff who are out there in the community and doing some of those things. Again, going back to like that celebration board or highlighting success stories in our internal newsletters as well as our external newsletters, or even during our meetings. Um, Again, one of the strategies as an example to think about is what I call a multi-level team agreement, or I call it a site agreement. Up on the screen, you can see a little bit of an example, and this is where we were looking at having teams who shared our outdoor space, because a lot of times there's disagreements among teams around that, but sharing that outdoor space, what does that look like? Who's going to set up in the morning? Who might break down or clean up in the afternoon? Who's going to help, rotate materials, or if things are broken? So again, getting those teams to sit down and have those discussions, those agreements around what I call the 5 W's, the who, what, where, when, and how, and then getting them written down so we have something to refer to. So having said that, woof, we've gone through lots and lots and lots of ideas here. And again, I really appreciate you staying with me and connecting. Um, Dana or Danya, sorry, I'm going to ask you if you can put the PowerPoint slide deck again back into the chat. That would be great for people. If you're coming on board, it's an opportunity for you to see it. And also, if you're listening to the recording, we'll have a place where you can download it. And on the back page, there is this sheet that actually talks about, or just shows you and describes each of the 4 components of being emotionally intelligent, as a way of getting you to start thinking about how are your teams doing, and ways we can support them in being successful. And so with that, I am actually going to stop sharing the presentation, and my internet is going a little crazy. So I'm taking my video off. So I apologize for that, but wanted to just give us an opportunity for anyone to share what stood out from you for you with any of the strategies, or what's in place or what's not in place, and or any thoughts that you're having, or again some ideas or exercises that you're doing with staff that you have found to be really effective.
Hi, this is Juan. I just took some notes and I wanted to share what kind of reached me, what gave me a lot to think about. One of the things you said was connection over control is something that I kind of want to dig a little more into. The graphic of check your battery, and then asking what support can you use from your team members. I want to use that one at my next staff meeting. I think that's a great idea. Just like you said, to normalize talking about our emotions, and going beyond the, I'm fine. And I think
Mhm.
the third big thing that makes me think, and I really have to think and reflect and plan on is I don't think we celebrate our successes enough.
Mm,
Like we'll say good job and it kind of just stands there, or but
mhm,
how can we do a better job of celebrating our weekly, monthly, year anniversary accomplishments?
mhm. Yeah, a lot. Certainly, there's a lot there. And I'm a little bit of a research geek, and so I read a lot of different books around research. And one of my favorite new books is uh, what is it? What is it called? Success, um, the Success Advantage. And what it talks about, and again, positive psychology is a relatively new field. It's only, like 10, 15 years old, but there's all of this really, really, really great research coming out of it. And the premise behind the book and the research that supports it is that we we're raised, especially in this country, that success breeds happiness. If you're successful, you're going to be happy. And everything kinds of evolves around that. And what the research is saying is actually it's the opposite that's true, that it's when you're happy, you become successful. And it makes sense because when we're thinking about, our lives, how many really successful people are out there who are depressed? Right? Who don't have great relationships, who dot, dot, dot. So success is not a precursor. It doesn't mean you're going to be happy. Yet people who are happy tend to be more successful. And the whole book just brings in a lot of different research around that. And it brings in the neurobiology around that. And the reason that I bring it up is, again, when I go out and I do training, I talk a lot about neurobiology and how we can hack the way our brain works so that we can actually come together and work more efficiently. And so there are things that we can do that will bring the culture of the whole um, program up, and that we can do it within teams and also as individuals. And one of my favorite things um, that I encourage people to do, and we do it as an exercise, is to smile. And the reason we talk about smiling is that when you smile, and it's genuine, we're not talking about the fake smile or the grimace, we're talking about just a genuine smile. It releases things like endorphins within our brain. And we know endorphins, right, make us feel good. Now we can actually triple X this. And by that, what that means is if I smile at another person and I pair it with eye contact, now what I'm doing is not only releasing endorphins, but also oxytocin, which we know is the love drug. And it actually creates a moment of bonding with another person. And here's what the research is saying it's really cool about that is that if we smile and make eye contact with somebody, say within our programs, we actually increase their efficacy by as much as 20%, meaning they could walk away, go back and do whatever they're going to do, and be up to 20% more productive. And what gets even more cooler than that, because they're being productive when they're working with children and families, it increases the children's or the family's productivity by 10%. So when we're talking about this ripple effect of how we can actually do things that are low cost and take very little time but have huge impact within our programs, within our teams, it's actually really, really cool and a lot of fun. So again, the name of that book is The Happiness Advantage. It comes out of positive psychology. And there's a lot of really good ideas and strategies that we can use for very, very little cost and time or money that we can start doing. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And Nina, I see that you wrote in. I really like the idea of normalizing talking around feelings and providing regular opportunities for connections. Yes. So again, how do we build in those touch points and ensure that they're genuine, which is a little bit different than just, of managing, right? It's a way of being with each other and promoting that throughout our program. Okay, then. What I will say is have a wonderful rest of your day. And at the beginning of our time together, I asked the question of what are you going to do this weekend to fill your cup? In whatever way you do that, have fun. I hope that there is joy. And I know that Daniel will go ahead and get this posted with the recording and the handouts if you want to go back and review it, or if you want to go back and even chunk it, take just one piece of this and share it with your teams. That would be phenomenal. And if you need to reach out to me, again, I'm Deidre Harris. I can be found at teamagreements.com and would be glad to support in any way possible. Thank you. Appreciate it. Bye bye, everyone.